Darian Holt was almost finished buffing the marble in the Kincaid Tower lobby when the building went too quiet. Not the gentle, satisfied quiet of a long workday finally exhaling, but the sharp kind, like a held breath right before something breaks. The hum of the floor machine vibrated through the mop handle in his palms, but under it he could hear the sudden absence of other sounds he'd come to depend on, the distant chatter from the 24-hour call center on 23, the ding of elevators cycling automatically, the security guard's radio hissing with idle gossip. All of it cut off at once, as if someone had dropped a dome over the skyscraper and unplugged the world outside. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. Darian's hands stilled on the handle. The floor machine whirred in place, polishing the same circle of marble until it gleamed like still water. He lifted his gaze to the wall of glass that made up the front of the lobby. The city beyond was a collage of neon and headlights and late-night buses, but through the revolving door, he couldn't hear the usual muffled rumble of traffic on Kincaid Avenue. Too quiet. There was again, that old, buried instinct lifting its head inside his chest. The one he'd promised himself he'd put down for good when he traded his last deployment for a battered custodial cart and a key ring heavy enough to anchor him in ordinary life. It moved under his ribs like something waking up, slow and unwilling. Easy, Holt, he told himself. It's a Thursday, not Kandahar. He clicked off the floor machine. Silence rushed in, pressing at his ears. The lobby's recessed lights cast soft pools of gold along the marble, catching on the chrome edges of the security desk and the elevator doors. A fake ficus in the corner shivered slightly in the air conditioning. Only the air conditioning didn't sound right either. He frowned and turned his head, listening. The vents still hissed, but the deep mechanical thrum of the building, the heartbeat of generators, servers, elevators cycling, had flattened. As though someone had smoothed a thumb over the waveforms and left everything too clean. Russ? Darian called, raising his voice toward the security desk. No answer. The monitors at the station glowed in an arc of pale blue, reflecting off the black glass. An open bag of chips slumped beside the keyboard, a half-eaten sandwich on a paper plate. The swivel chair sat empty, its wheels turned slightly sideways as if someone had just stepped away. Darian's jaw flexed. Russell Baker was not the kind of guy who stepped away from free food. Or from his post without mumbling something about a bathroom break loud enough for the cameras, and for Darian, to hear. He left the floor machine where it was and pushed his cart toward the desk. The wheels squeaked once, a high embarrassed sound he'd been meaning to oil for weeks. He'd never gotten around to it, too many classrooms to sanitize, too many conference rooms to reset, too many nights when he'd had to leave right on time to catch a few hours of sleep before waking his daughter for school. Lily, he thought, and his throat tightened the way it always did when worry and love collided in the same heartbeat. 8 years old, asleep in a small apartment across town with Mrs. Nguyen next door keeping an ear out, because child care cost more than he made in a week. Routine keeps her safe. Routine keeps us invisible. That had been the deal he'd made with himself when he'd walked away from the life where people called him by a name that wasn't on any legal document. Saint. A call sign, not a name, something whispered over radios in places where the air tasted like metal and dust and the wrong kind of quiet meant someone was about to die. He pushed the cart around the security desk. Russ, if you're taking another smoke break, I'm stealing your coffee punch card. Last warning, man. Still nothing. The security monitors showed a grid of camera feeds, 24 squares full of empty hallways, dark conference rooms, and the vacant parking garage beneath the tower. On one screen, the twinkling lights of the city framed the 42nd floor executive offices. On another, the cafeteria sat deserted, rows of chairs lined up like soldiers waiting for orders that would never come. No movement. Except. Darian leaned closer. One of the feeds flickered, a momentary glitch in the image from the basement level where the loading dock and maintenance entrance were. Static crawled across the corner of the screen, then settled. He caught a flash of something, a smear of motion, a shape cutting across the lens. Then it was gone. His heart gave one hard, unwelcome thud. Maybe Russ just rebooted the system, he told himself. Maybe IT was running an update. Maybe the universe finally decided to give you a boring night. But his fingers were already reaching for the radio lying beside the keyboard. "Control, this is Holt in the lobby," he said, the words slipping out in the old cadence before he could catch himself. "Russ, you up?" Static answered him. A faint hiss, like a breath held over glass. He clicked the radio off, then on again. Tried the side channel. Nothing. His gaze dropped to the panel beside the monitors, where the elevator status indicators glowed in a vertical line of green. All cars idle. All doors closed. No active calls. That was wrong too. It was nearly 11. On any other night, resources would still be up on 37, grinding against a deadline. The call center on 23 would have agents in rolling chairs, headsets crooked, taking calls from desperate customers halfway around the world. And on 42, that was Alara Kincaid's floor. The CEO never left before midnight. He knew her schedule not because he was supposed to, but because his routes crossed hers almost every night. He emptied the trash in the executive wing between 10:30 and 11, making sure to hit the corner office last. She'd be at her glass desk, jacket off, dark hair pulled into a loose knot, the skyline gleaming behind her. Sometimes she'd nod at him. Once, she'd asked his name. He'd said, "Darian," because what else was there to say, and she'd smiled in a distracted way that said she'd probably forget it before he finished the room. He hadn't minded. That was the point. Invisible. Still, she should be up there. And if she was, one of those elevator lights should be moving. He watched the panel for another 10 seconds. Nothing changed. Something's wrong. The thought wasn't a shout. It didn't come with sirens and flashing lights. It arrived quietly, like an assessment typed in the corner of a mission brief. Darian straightened. Every ache in his back and knees, from years of carrying things no human being should have to carry, followed by years of pushing a mop, faded beneath a wash of adrenaline so clean it almost felt like relief. He didn't want this. He didn't want this. But a part of him that had been half asleep for 3 years was suddenly sitting up, swinging its legs over the edge of the bed. He reached under the security desk and flipped open the metal box Russ pretended he didn't know Darian had installed. It wasn't regulation. It wasn't in the building manual. It was just a bolted-on first aid kit that no one questioned because no one looked too closely at the janitor's improvisations. Inside, beneath a layer of sterile gauze and tape, lay a compact trauma kit, a pair of nitrile gloves, a flashlight, a multi-tool, and a small, matte black pistol in a holster worn smooth along one edge. Darian stared at the gun. He'd told himself he kept it for worst-case scenarios that would never happen. Earthquakes. Fires. The kind of active shooter drills corporate like to run for preparedness and then forget. He'd told himself he'd never actually draw it. That he'd left that version of himself in a desert half a world away. Across the lobby, the elevator doors gleamed like closed eyes. He slipped the pistol from the box and clipped the holster inside the waistband at the small of his back, under his dark green custodial shirt. The weight settled against his spine, familiar and unwelcome all at once. "Just in case," he murmured. His reflection in the black glass of the security monitors looked the same, broad shoulders and an off-the-rack work shirt, dark stubble along a jaw that needed a shave, brown skin gone a few shades lighter under the fluorescent lights. The only thing different was his eyes. They'd sharpened. Like they used to be. He checked the time on the monitor. 22:57. 3 minutes to 11. If Alara Kincaid was running on her usual schedule, she'd be packing up now. Shutting down her 3 screens, slipping her laptop into the leather bag with her initials embossed in gold. She'd take the private elevator from 42 straight down to the lobby. Snag her coat from the rack by the glass wall. Walk out into the night where a black sedan would already be idling at the curb. Unless something had interrupted that routine. Darian toggled through the camera feeds until he reached the 42nd floor. The executive hallway appeared, empty and still. The door to Kincaid's office stood half-closed, the glass wall was a black mirror reflecting nothing. He zoomed the feed in as far as the cheap building cameras allowed. The desk sat neat and abandoned. No laptop. No CEO. She'd already left the office. He flicked his gaze to the elevator indicator again. Still all green. That nagging quiet thickened, pushing at the base of his skull. He grabbed his key ring, clipped it to his belt, and left the cart by the security desk. For a second he hovered, fighting the ingrained impulse to leave a note, to explain his absence to a supervisor who didn't even remember his last name. Then he turned and jogged across the lobby, his boots soft on the marble. He bypassed the bank of regular elevators and headed for the service corridor. The door required a key card, but his custodial badge beeped it open. As the heavy fire door thumped shut behind him, the world narrowed to concrete walls, exposed pipes, and the smell of detergent and dust. The service elevator sat at the end of the corridor, metal doors scuffed from years of deliveries and trash runs. A digital display over the doors showed its current position. B2. Basement level 2. Not where it should be. Darian hesitated, fingers hovering over the call button. The service elevator shared a shaft with the main bank, separated by steel and safety systems designed to keep the building efficient and secure. Basement level 2 was the loading dock. He pressed the button. Nothing happened. No soft chime. No movement indicator. The display stayed stubbornly at B2. He pressed it again. Held it. The panel flickered once, then went dark altogether. Okay, he muttered under his breath. That's not good. He stepped back and scanned the corridor. At the far end, a red door-marked stairs glowed in the emergency light. He headed for it. The stairwell dropped 12 stories down and 42 up. He'd done the climb enough times during fire drills to know where the landings changed, where the air thinned, where his knees would protest. Tonight he barely felt the burn as he pounded downward. At each level, a small metal plate beside the door marked the floor. 1, B1. B2. He paused on the B2 landing with his hand on the cool metal bar of the door. From the other side, the muffled reek of exhaust and damp concrete seeped through. Somewhere beyond this door lay the loading dock, the maintenance bays, the access point for every vendor and courier who came in after hours. And, if his gut was right, the reason the building felt like it was holding its breath. Darian drew in a slow breath of his own. He tugged his shirt loose so it hung over the holster, then slid his hand under the fabric to rest lightly on the pistol grip. Don't be stupid, Holt. You've got a kid. Lily's face flashed in his mind, the way she scrunched up her nose when she laughed, the soft weight of her head on his shoulder when she fell asleep watching cartoons after school. The rent notice he'd folded into quarters and shoved in the back of his drawer 2 days ago. The note from her teacher about a field trip he hadn't signed off on yet because he didn't know if he'd have the money. You promised her. He did. He'd promised he was done with danger, done with the kind of choices that could leave her without a father. But if something was happening in his building, if people were about to get hurt while he stood on the other side of a door and did nothing, what would that make him? The same question had chased him out of the military and into a series of minimum-wage jobs. How to be a good man when every version of himself seemed to come with a cost. He set his jaw and pushed the bar. The door opened onto a strip of concrete leading to the loading dock. Sodium vapor lights flickered overhead, bathing everything in a jaundiced glow. A forklift sat abandoned, its forks raised halfway. Stacks of pallets lined one wall, shrink-wrapped boxes forming a maze of shadowy corridors. The large roll-up door to the alley was closed. The small man door beside it stood ajar. Darian listened. Their voices. Low. Male. Speaking with that particular cadence of people who didn't want to be overheard by anyone who didn't belong. We're synced. Elevators are ours. You've got 8 minutes before patrols start wondering why the board's frozen, so move. The voice came from deeper in the dock area, maybe near the maintenance office. Cool, precise, no wasted breath. Another replied. Copy that. Team Alpha moving to elevator bank now. Darian's stomach dropped. Armed robbers. It was the first phrase his brain supplied, distilled from the tone, the words, the timing. He pictured men in tactical vests, or maybe dressed as maintenance staff, moving through his building with practiced confidence. He'd seen operations like this from the other side once. Clean, efficient, exploit the weak spots, hit the target before anyone realized the rules had changed. This is not your fight. The thought flared, hot and scared. Then another layered over it, slower, heavier. If they're heading for the elevator bank, they're heading for her. Elara Kincaid. The woman whose name sat on the plaque outside the building and on the paychecks that arrived late but always arrived. The woman the financial news channels loved to praise or crucify, depending on how her company's stock was doing that week. And the woman who, for reasons he didn't pretend to understand, had once paused as she passed him in the hallway and said, "You keep this place running, don't you?" He'd shrugged, embarrassed. "Just try not to let it fall apart." She'd smiled, a quick flash of something almost tired. "That makes two of us, Mr. Holt," he'd said. Darian Holt. Her smile had sharpened. "Mr. Holt. Good night." It was nothing. A sliver of conversation in a life full of more important words. But as he stood in the loading dock, hand on his hidden gun, that memory anchored itself in his chest. If the elevators are locked, they can box her in. He stepped back into the stairwell and let the door close softly behind him. His breathing sounded loud in the concrete shaft now, magnified by adrenaline. He didn't have a comms team. He didn't have backup. The building's security system had been cut, or jammed, or rerouted. He was a janitor with a gun he wasn't supposed to have and a past he didn't talk about. But he did have something the intruders didn't. He knew this building like it was an extension of his own body. Every shortcut. Every maintenance hatch. Every blind spot the cameras didn't quite cover. He turned and started up the stairs. On 42, Elara Kincaid closed her laptop and felt the echo of its click in her bones. The office around her was all glass and steel and tasteful art, but at this hour it felt more like a terrarium, a curated environment designed to keep a rare specimen alive under unnatural light. Her reflection in the window looked like a ghost layered over the city, pale skin and dark hair and the faint shadows under her eyes that her eyeliner couldn't hide anymore. She pressed her fingers to the bridge of her nose and breathed out slowly. "You should go home," she told herself aloud. The sound of her own voice startled her. Beyond the glass wall, the hallway lights dimmed automatically at 11, shifting from bright corporate white to a warmer glow. The building knew her habits almost better than she did. It knew she rarely left before midnight. It knew she worked weekends. It knew the pattern of her key card moving from office to boardroom to server room. Tonight, though, she'd promised herself she'd make an exception. She'd texted her father an hour ago, "I'll swing by if I get out of here before 11. Don't wait up." He hadn't replied. He was probably asleep in the assisted living facility they'd moved him into after his second fall. Or watching late-night baseball reruns with the volume turned up too high. She shut off the desk lamp. The office plunged into shadow, the city outside taking over as her primary light source. Her gaze slid unconsciously to the corner of the room where a small framed photograph sat on a side table. A little boy with sticky cheeks and curly hair grinned up at a woman holding him, Elara, 10 years younger, laughing without realizing someone had taken the picture. Leo. Her nephew. Her brother's son. She picked up the frame and held it for a moment. "You'll get your Andy back on weekends soon, kiddo," she murmured. "I just have to get this ship stabilized first." She set the photo down, grabbed her bag, and headed for the door. The hallway outside was empty. The carpet muffled her heels as she walked past the frosted glass doors of the boardroom and the smaller offices assigned to senior executives. Everyone else had gone home hours ago. At the end of the corridor, the private elevator waited for her behind brushed steel doors. She pressed the call button. A soft chime answered almost immediately. Efficient. As always. The doors slid open. Two men stood inside. They both wore navy coveralls with the Kincaid Tower Maintenance logo stitched over the left chest. One was tall and lean, his hair hidden under a cap. The other was shorter, with a buzz cut and a utility belt weighted with tools. "Evening, Miss Kincaid," the taller one said, nodding. His voice carried the easy neutrality of someone used to talking to people above his pay grade. "Evening," she replied, stepping in. "I didn't realize we scheduled maintenance this late." "Just some diagnostics on the shaft, ma'am," the shorter one said. "Won't be in your way." She smiled politely and turned to face the doors as they closed. If she'd been less tired, she might have noticed that the taller man's boots were too new, too clean for someone who worked construction. Or that the shorter one's belt carried more than just pliers and wrenches. But 12-hour days and quarterly earnings calls did their own kind of damage. The car began to descend. Darian hit the 20th floor before his lungs started to protest. He slowed, hands sliding along the cool metal railing as he forced his breathing under control. Sweat dampened the back of his shirt, sticking the fabric to his skin. On the landing, a small metal access panel sat flush with the wall, marked elevator control in faded black lettering. He dug out his keys, found the thin one with the notch on the end, and jimmied the panel open. Inside, a simple display showed the positions of the building's elevator cars as a set of LED dots moving up and down a vertical line. Tonight, the pattern was wrong. Instead of a constant dance of motion, every dot sat frozen. One at lobby. One at floor 12. One at floor 31. And one between 42 and 38. Darian's stomach clenched. That car had no business being stopped between floors. Not unless there was a malfunction. Or someone wanted it there. He traced the dot's position with his fingertip, counting down the floors in his head. The stalled car was roughly level with the mechanical access on 39. He closed the panel, his fingers suddenly clumsy on the metal latch. 39, then. He took the stairs two at a time. Inside the private elevator, Alara braced herself with a hand on the rail as the lights flickered. The car shuddered once. Twice. Then stopped. "Seriously," she muttered. She stabbed the lobby button. Nothing. The taller maintenance man made a show of frowning at the button panel. "Huh. That's not supposed to happen." "Is this part of your diagnostics?" she asked. "Not exactly." His voice had shifted slightly. The relaxed neutrality disappeared, replaced by something quieter. Sharper. A prickle of unease slid down the back of her neck. The shorter man stepped away from the wall. His hand dropped toward his belt. "Okay," Alara said, heart kicking against her ribs. "What is this? If you need to run a test, I'd appreciate some warning before you." The shorter man brought the gun out so smoothly it took her brain a full second to register what she was seeing. Black. Compact. Silencer. He leveled it at the center of her chest. Alara froze. The taller man's smile didn't reach his eyes now. "Miss Kincaid," he said, and his tone was almost apologetic. "I'm going to need you to stay very, very calm." Darian burst through the door to 39 and into another service corridor, this one narrower, the ceiling lower. The mechanical access room for the upper elevator bank sat halfway down the hall behind a metal door secured with an ancient keypad. Most people didn't know it existed. He did. He punched in the code the head of maintenance had once shown him in a moment of tired generosity. The box beeped. The door clicked open. Heat and noise rolled over him. The room was a cramped jungle of cables, gears, and humming machinery. The massive winches and pulleys that operated the top half elevator bank filled most of the space, their steel cables disappearing upward into the darkness of the shaft. Darian stepped carefully onto the grated floor, the vibration of the machinery buzzing up through his boots. On the far wall, a diagnostic console glowed with scrolling data. Someone had jury-rigged an extra device onto it, a sleek, black box with a forest of cables plugged into the ports. He didn't need the brand name to know what it was. A hijack unit. Something that could override the building's controls and seize the elevators. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, eyes flicking over the readings on the console. Car 4, status, halt. Location, between LVL 42 and 38. Doors, sealed. Override, external. He swore under his breath. Car 4 was the private elevator. His left hand went instinctively to his radio before he remembered the dead static. He ground his teeth. Think. He scanned the console again. A small indicator in the corner marked audio link. The light beside it was red. He thumbed the switch. It flipped to green. A soft buzz filled the room, then resolved into sound. What we want is very simple, a man's voice was saying, filtered and distant but clear enough. You cooperate, this ends with you going home tonight. You don't cooperate, and somebody has to explain to your board why their CEO's brains are decorating the walls of her own elevator. Darian's grip tightened on the edge of the console. Alara's voice came next, flatter than he would have expected. You think threatening me is the best way to get what you want? Brave, he thought, not without a flicker of respect. We think efficiency is the best way, another voice replied. This one was cooler, with a faint accent Darian couldn't place immediately. The transfer protocol for Kincaid Consolidated's emergency liquidity accounts requires biometric confirmation from 2 board members and your personal key. We have 1 board member already. A beat. Alara again. Who? Darian could almost see her shoulders tightening. A low chuckle. Mr. Levinson sends his regards, by the way. He was very helpful. Darian's mind supplied the face, Saul Levinson, chairman of the board, silver hair and expensive suits, the man who'd publicly clashed with Alara last quarter over her refusal to sell off their manufacturing division. If they had him, they had leverage. And now, the first man said, we just need you. Darian flicked his gaze over the console again. A schematic of the elevator shaft winked in the corner, a vertical line with car positions marked as small rectangles. Car 4's rectangle pulsed between 42 and 38. He followed the line with his eyes to the spot where the mechanical access hatch would be. Directly beneath his feet. Of course it was. He crouched by the grated floor and found the panel's outline. 4 heavy bolts anchored it in place. He slipped the multi-tool from his pocket and flipped out the wrench head. Saint, what the hell are you doing? He muttered. The name slid out of him like muscle memory, a ghost wearing his voice. He froze. The audio from the console crackled. Then another voice, sharper now, cut through. Say that again, the accented man said. What did you call yourself? Darian's blood ran cold. He looked at the console. The audio link light still shone green. Oh, hell, he breathed. He lunged for the switch and flicked it off. The room dropped back into the mechanical hum. Too late. Down in the elevator car, someone had heard him. He swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how loud his own heartbeat sounded. He hadn't called himself that in years. The last time he'd heard it spoken out loud, it had been through a headset, over the roar of rotor blades and gunfire. Saint. The man you send when you want a miracle that probably costs more than you're prepared to pay. He went back to work on the bolts, fingers moving faster now. Above him, cables creaked softly. Inside the stalled car, the taller man, Vargas, though Alara didn't know his name yet, tilted his head, listening. What was that? He murmured. The shorter man, who'd introduced himself as Finch when he'd put the gun in her face, frowned. What was what? Vargas stepped closer to the control panel. He flipped a switch Alara didn't recognize. A faint hiss filled the car, like an old radio clearing its throat. NT, what the hell are you doing? The voice came through distorted, chopped off at the beginning, but Alara heard the words clearly. Saint. The name hung in the cramped air. Vargas went very still. Alara watched his face sharpen, something calculating sliding into place behind his eyes. He reached to the panel again and adjusted a dial. Control, he said quietly. We've got an extra variable up in the mechanical room. Calls himself Saint. There was a pause. Then a new voice, colder and somehow emptier than the others, replied. Confirm that call sign. Confirmed, Vargas said. I heard it myself. American male, mid-30s, sounds like he's right on top of us. Literally. Another pause. Elara swallowed. She didn't understand the word they were using, but she understood the way the air in the elevator changed, like the pressure had dropped. The new voice spoke again, each syllable precise. Pull up the old files, it said. If it's the same Saint I'm thinking of, we may have a problem. Finch shifted uncomfortably. Boss, come on. It's a janitor. Building rat. Probably just some wannabe with a hero complex. Vargas didn't answer. His gaze flicked to the ceiling of the car. To the hatch. Darian got the last bolt free and eased the hatch panel up just enough to see through the gap. Darkness yawned beneath him. The elevator shaft was a vertical tunnel of steel and shadow. Heavy cables drooped past, disappearing into the gloom. About 10 feet below, the top of car 4 sat like a gray metal island in the dark. He slid his legs through the opening, found the support rungs welded into the shaft wall, and began to climb down. The air grew hotter as he descended. The smell of grease and metal filled his nose. Don't look down, he told himself, and then corrected it. Don't think down. You think down, you think fall. He eased himself onto the car's roof and crouched low, feeling the faint vibration of the suspended box beneath him. Somewhere down there, a woman stood at gunpoint. He rested his palm flat on the metal. I've got you, he whispered, though she couldn't hear him. He crawled toward the center of the roof where the emergency hatch was bolted. Voices filtered faintly through the metal. He couldn't make out the words, just the tones, cool, clipped, professional. The kind of men who didn't wave their guns around or shout like movie villains. The kind who made decisions quickly and did what they came to do. He exhaled slowly, forcing his pulse down. Options. He could try to breach the hatch now, drop in and hope surprise and the cramped space worked in his favor. Or he could wait, gather more intel, maybe find a way to shift the car enough to throw them off balance. He slid the edge of the multi-tool under one of the hatch bolts and began to work it loose, moving slowly to minimize the noise. Below him, through the thin seam around the hatch, the cooler voice floated up, shaped by the echoing metal. Are you absolutely certain, Vargas? Yes, sir, Vargas replied. I heard him. Saint. That Saint. The other man swore softly in a language Darian recognized but couldn't place with the distance and distortion. Change of plans, the voice said. We stick to the timeline, but I want eyes on that mechanical room. If it is him, we neutralize quickly. Last thing we need is our own ghost in the machine. Ghost in the machine. Darian almost smiled despite himself. It was good to know he still lived rent-free in someone's nightmares. But the satisfaction was fleeting. If these guys knew who he used to be, they'd adapt. They'd assume competence where they might have assumed cowardice. That raised the stakes for everyone. Especially the woman in the box under his boots. He got the first bolt loose, then the second. Sweat dripped from his jaw onto the metal. Move. Above him, the cables creaked again, a small but ominous sound. Saint, the cool voice said, now sharper. If you can hear this, and I suspect you can, I'd think very carefully about what you're doing up there. Darian froze, fingers on the third bolt. The voice continued, the words vibrating through the roof. You're outnumbered. You're outgunned. And whatever you were once, we both know you're not that anymore. You've got something to lose now. Lily's face flashed behind his eyes. We're here for money, the man said. That's it. We walk with what we came for, your boss lady goes home annoyed but intact, your board member gets to live long enough to cash his cut, and you go back to mopping floors and pretending your hands are clean. You interfere, and people die. Maybe her. Maybe Levinson. Maybe you. A beat. Maybe someone who isn't even in the building right now. Darian's grip tightened so hard on the bolt that the metal bit into his skin. They didn't know about Lily. They couldn't. He'd buried that part of his life too deep. But the threat punched straight through the walls he'd built around himself. "I know your type," the voice said. "Men with pasts. Men with regrets. Men who took one look at the price of staying in the game and chose to disappear into ordinary. Smart choice. Don't make a stupid one now." Silence filled the shaft. Darian's lungs burned. He knew he should back off. Let corporate insurance sort it out later. Hope the robbers were as straightforward as they claimed. But then Alara's voice drifted up faintly. "So that's your pitch," she said, her tone dry despite the situation. "Rob the company, bribe my board member, and send me home with a good story for the shareholders?" The cool voice chuckled. "Something like that. And if I say no?" Another pause. Then, flatly. "Then Finch gets creative." There was a smaller sound then, sickeningly familiar. The dull, wet crack of a fist or a gun but meeting bone. A grunt of pain. Alara sucked in a breath. Darian didn't think. He moved. He twisted the third bolt free, muscles burning, and went for the fourth. Vargas's gaze never left the ceiling. He could feel the presence up there now like a pressure change. Years of his own training told him exactly where on the car roof a man would position himself to drop in with the least exposure. Saint. Of all the buildings in all the cities, it had to be this one. He adjusted his grip on his gun. "Boss," Finch said quietly, eyes flicking between Alara and Levinson, who slumped in the corner with a bleeding lip and hands tied in front of him. "Permission to put one through the hatch, just to let our guest know we're serious?" "No," the voice in their earpieces answered sharply. "We don't punch holes in our own ride unless we have to. Last thing we need is to compromise the safety systems and drop this box while we're still inside it." "Then what do you want us to do about him?" Vargas asked. "A beat. Make sure he's who I think he is," the boss said. "Then we'll decide." The fourth bolt came free with a protesting squeal. Darian eased the hatch up half an inch. Warm, stale air flowed over his face. He allowed himself a single breath, 1 second to steady his hands. Then he heard it. Not words this time. Not the cool voice or Alara's brittle defiance. A whisper. "Please," Levinson's voice rasped, broken and thin. Don't hit me again. I told you, the codes are tiered. I don't have the last." Darian didn't hear the rest. Something inside him that had been straining against its leash snapped. Saint stopped thinking. He launched. He kicked the hatch the rest of the way open and dropped through the opening in a blur of motion, gravity grabbing him hard. For a split second he was weightless in the cramped box, his body a dark shape against the harsh fluorescent light. 3 guns snapped up toward him. Alara's eyes went wide. There was just enough time for her to see the janitor from the hall, only he didn't move like a janitor now. He moved like something else entirely. The first shot went off. The elevator filled with the deafening crack of suppressed gunfire and the sharp, metallic taste of fear. And above it all, over the team's comms, the boss's voice sliced through. "Confirmed. It's him. It's Saint." Darian hit the floor of the car in a controlled crash, shoulder rolling, hand already reaching for the gun at his back. He came up in a tight crouch between Alara and Levinson, putting his body between them and the men with the guns. For a heartbeat, nobody breathed. Vargas's finger tightened on the trigger. Finch shifted his aim. Alara's heart slammed against her ribs. Somewhere in the depths of the building, machinery groaned. Above them, in the mechanical room, the hijack unit's lights flickered once. Then everything went black. The elevator dropped. And 3 men with guns and 1 janitor with a past looked at one another in the blinding dark, gravity ripping the floor out from under them, as the CEO of Kincaid Consolidated realized that the night had just torn itself into a before and an after. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. For one impossible second, the elevator hung in the dark like a thought that hadn't decided whether to exist. Then gravity remembered it. The floor jerked out from under them. Alara's stomach slammed into her lungs, her hands shooting blindly for anything solid as the car dropped. Saul Levinson screamed, a raw, broken sound, and Finch swore, the word punched flat by the sudden plunge. Darian didn't waste air on sound. He moved. He slammed a shoulder into Alara, knocking her sideways into the corner and throwing his arm across her chest to pin her there. His other hand went to the rail welded along the wall. He grabbed it and held on, muscles screaming as the car fell. Down, he barked, voice cutting through the chaos. He felt rather than saw her obey, folding in on herself, ducking her head. Levinson crumpled, hands over his face. Finch stumbled, thrown off balance, his gun arm flailing wide. Vargas went to his knees and slammed one hand flat to the floor, the other braced against the inner panel as if he could steady the entire car by will. The sensation of falling stretched, seconds elongating into thin wire. Darian's brain ran calculations he didn't have time to consciously follow. Distance between floors. Average velocity of a free-falling elevator car with compromised systems. The chances of the emergency brakes catching before they hit the buffer at the bottom of the shaft. 30%, maybe. 40% if the people who designed this tower hadn't cut corners. Hold, he shouted, though there was nothing any of them could hold against. The car screamed. Metal shrieked against metal, a high, tearing sound that bit into the fillings of Darian's teeth. The fall jolted, then slowed, the violent plunge turning into a savage, shuddering drag as the emergency brakes bit the rails. Alara's head snapped forward. Pain burst white behind her eyes. She tasted blood. The car lurched once more and then slammed to a stop hard enough to rattle her bones. Silence crashed down. For a moment, the only sound was the ragged, overlapping gasps of 5 people relearning how to breathe. Darian's arm was still across her chest. She could feel the tremor in his muscles, the heat of his body in the pitch black. Somewhere in the dark, a gun clattered to the floor. Time jolted forward again. Finch cursed, the word thick with pain. You idiot. Darian's hand left the rail. He didn't think, didn't plan. There wasn't time for either. He pivoted off the momentum of the stop, using the recoil in his own body to launch himself toward the sound of the dropped weapon. His fingers brushed cold metal. He closed his hand around it. Don't, Vargas snapped, but he was a half-second behind. Darian rolled, dragging Alara with him, using his own weight to pull her down behind the partial cover of the corner. He shoved the gun into her hands. She stared at the dark shape, fingers curling reflexively. I pointed at the loud one, Darian hissed in her ear. Safety's off. Don't put your finger on the trigger unless you mean it. Why you're giving me the gun? Welcome to the night shift. He didn't wait to see if she followed through. He surged back to his feet, the movement a clean, brutal line through the cramped space. His own weapon came free of its holster at the small of his back like it had never stopped living there. The darkness broke in a jagged flash as Finch fired blindly, desperate. The suppressed shot spat light, a brief, ghostly strobe. For an instant, the car froze in a tableau. Finch, broad and compact, feet too wide, center of gravity too high, aiming in the wrong direction. Vargas, still half-crouched, gun low but perfectly aligned, eyes tracking not where Darian was but where he was about to be. Levinson, curled on the floor by the panel, hands bound, blood on his shirt. Alara, in the corner, both hands on the stolen gun, arms quivering, eyes huge and white. And Darian, in the center of it all, moving with the terrible grace of a man who had once dedicated his entire existence to moving exactly like this. The light died. In the afterimage burned into his vision, Darian finished the pivot he'd started and drove his shoulder into Finch's solar plexus. The impact felt like tackling a filing cabinet. They slammed into the wall. Finch's breath whooshed out in a shocked grunt, the gun in his hand firing again as his fingers convulsed. The shot went wild, punching harmlessly into the ceiling. Darian brought his elbow down hard on Finch's wrist, bone meeting bone with a sick crunch. Finch screamed. The gun dropped. Darian kicked it away on instinct, sending it skittering under Alara's feet. Got it, she gasped, more to herself than anyone else, shifting the gun Darian had given her into one hand and pinning the fallen weapon under her heel. Something hard and sharp slammed into the side of Darian's head. Stars detonated behind his eyes. Vargas. He'd come in low, using the moment Darian committed to Finch. Not much room to swing in the cramped car, but enough to drive the butt of his pistol into Darian's temple. The world reeled. Darian staggered sideways, shoulder clipping the panel. His fingers spasmed on his own gun, almost losing it. Almost. He rode the pain like a wave instead of letting it knock him under. He'd had worse. He'd had concussions where the universe turned sideways and stayed that way for days. This was just a bell rung hard. Drop it, Vargas growled. His presence loomed in the dark, a shadow denser than the rest. You're fast, Saint, but this box only has so much room. I put one in your leg and we're done here. Nobody has to die if you don't make them. You keep saying that, Darian rasped. Starting to think you don't believe it. He heard the tiny intake of breath from Alara when he used the name. Saint. He hadn't meant to. The old skin had slipped on without permission. My boss believes it, Vargas said. He's a practical man. He knows dead CEOs are messy. Alive ones can still sign things. What about janitors? Darian asked. We get a vote? Something in Vargas's tone shifted, gaining an edge of curiosity. I'll admit, I wasn't expecting you, he said. Last file we got on you was 3 years ago. Word was you'd gone to ground. Got yourself a quiet little life. Upgraded from sandstorms to spilled coffee, Darian said. Big career move. Alara's fingers tightened on the gun. She knew he was buying time. She didn't know for what. Her pulse hammered in her throat so hard it made it hard to hear. Here's how this goes, Vargas continued, voice carrying with unnerving calm in the blind dark. You holster your weapon and step away from Ms. Kincaid and Mr. Levinson. I keep my promise that nobody dies tonight. You walk away with a story to tell a very ungrateful building supervisor. We take what we came for and vanish. You get to keep your little second life. And if I say no? Darian asked. He already knew the answer. But sometimes you ask the question anyway, to map out the pressure points. You say no, Vargas said softly, and I start putting bullets through kneecaps. Maybe not yours. Maybe the CFO's. Maybe the nice receptionist downstairs. Maybe the kid cleaning the coffee machines on 23. Maybe, he added, almost conversationally, someone whose address I haven't even bothered to look up yet, but whose existence I can guess. Men like you don't quit the life for nothing, Saint. You got a tether somewhere. Darian's jaw clenched so hard it hurt. Lily. Her name screamed through him, silent and furious. They don't know about her. They're fishing. But the hook had found soft tissue anyway. He tasted metal on his tongue and wasn't sure if it was blood or rage. You talk too much, he said. Then he killed the lights. Later, Alara would replay that second in her mind 100 times, trying to understand what he'd done. She thought the elevator was already dark. But there are shades of dark, layers of it, and Darian somehow found a way to peel one more layer off. She heard the faint scrape of his hand finding the emergency panel behind him. Heard the click of something small and plastic snapping. The emergency backup lights, tiny, almost decorative red LEDs, died. The elevator became absolute. She could no longer see even the pale oval of her own hands. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears, a thunder loud enough, she thought, to paint a target on her chest. And in that deeper dark, something strange happened inside her. Her eyes stopped trying to make sense of shapes. Her other senses stepped up. She could smell sweat and concrete dust and the faint, clean soap from Darian's shirt. She could hear the minuscule shift of leather on metal as Vargas adjusted his grip. The line of the elevator cable far above them, tension redistributed. And under it all, the sound of Darian's breathing. Controlled. Measured. Totally, frighteningly steady. "Bad move," Vargas said quietly. "Yeah," Darian replied. And then the cramped metal box exploded into motion. Darian moved first. He knew exactly where everyone had been in the last fractional flash of light. Men like Vargas trained themselves to build three-dimensional maps of a room from snippets, from brief glimpses when muzzle flare lit the geometry. Darian had been doing it longer. He dropped into a low slide, sweeping his leg in a hard arc. His shin crashed into Finch's ankles. Finch, still half-stunned from the earlier hits, toppled like a felled tree. His shoulder slammed into Vargas's legs. Vargas staggered. Two bodies between Darian and the line of fire. Half a second. He took it. He pivoted on his planted hand and kicked up, heel connecting with something hard, metal or bone, he couldn't tell. A gun skittered away. A shot roared in the dark, the muzzle flash a brief, wild blossom. Heat grazed Darian's shoulder, the bullet tearing through the fabric of his shirt. Alara yelped and ducked lower, her back pressed so hard into the corner she could feel the cool of the metal through her blouse. "Don't shoot," she shouted into the chaos before her brain could edit it. "You hit me, you don't get your codes." The words were clumsy, but the logic was sharp. Vargas swore. The next shot stopped before it started. Levinson whimpered. "For God's sake, just give them what they want, Alara, please." "Shut up, Saul," she snapped. Her own voice startled her. It sounded not like a corporate presentation or a boardroom compromise, but like steel gone thin and dangerous. Somewhere to her left, something heavy slammed into the wall. Flesh, then a groan. "Saint," the boss's voice crackled over Vargas's comm. Alara could hear it faintly, the sound thin and tinny. "Update." "Busy," Darian grunted. "Wrong Saint," the voice replied dryly. "My Saint doesn't pick fights in boxes he can't get out of." "Maybe yours retired," Darian said. "You know how it is. Union rules." He caught Finch's wrist in the dark and twisted, using the man's own momentum to flip him onto his back. Finch's breath whooshed out in a gasping sob. Darian drove his forearm into the man's throat and pressed, cutting off sound and leverage in one motion. "Gun," he snapped. Alara realized he was talking to her. Her fingers tightened on the weapon he'd shoved into her hand, slick with sweat. She couldn't see him. She aimed toward the sound of his voice anyway and extended her arm, praying she wasn't about to hand the gun directly to the wrong man. Warm fingers brushed her wrist in the dark. He took the weapon from her, moved away in a blur of rustle and breath. "Two guns now." Vargas adjusted. He let go of the idea of seeing and leaned into the training that had taught him to operate in blackout conditions. He listened instead. Saint was favoring his left side now. That hit to the head had disoriented him more than he was letting on. Vargas could hear it in the fractional delay between shifts of weight, the microscopic flinch when he turned too quickly. He tracked it. He fired. The shot tore across the tight space like a thunderclap. Darian felt the bullet before he registered the sound. A searing line knifed across his ribs. Heat flared along his side, wet and immediate. He grunted, more in irritation than pain. "Got you," Vargas said softly. "Just a scratch," Darian replied through clenched teeth. Blood soaked into his shirt, warm and sticky. He could feel it start to slide down his flank. Too high and too shallow to be lethal. For now. He shifted his weight deliberately, letting Vargas hear the movement, then ghosted sideways and up, using the handrail as a pivot point. The car was small, but it still had vertical as well as horizontal. He kicked off the wall, bringing the butt of one gun down hard in the direction of Vargas's last words. It connected with something solid. Vargas's vision exploded in white light behind his closed eyes. He staggered back, momentarily blind in both the literal and metaphorical sense. Darian followed with his other hand, jamming the second gun forward until cold metal met warm flesh. He pressed the barrel into the hollow beneath Vargas's jaw. The world narrowed to that single, trembling line. "You fire again," Darian said quietly, breathing hard, "and I redecorate this box with your brain." Silence fell. Heavy. Absolute. Even over the whine of strained cables and the rasp of Levinson's terrified breathing, the quiet inside the car felt thick. "Bold of you," the boss's voice said in Vargas's ear. "Considering we still hold all the other cards." "Cards can burn," Darian said. He wasn't talking to the voice. Not really. He was talking to Vargas, to the man whose pulse he could feel fluttering under the barrel. He heard a faint, humorless huff of air. It took him a second to realize it was Vargas laughing. "Some things don't change," Vargas murmured. "That's the problem," Darian shot back. "Saint," the boss said, patient and cold. "How much do you know about what's happening in the rest of the building right now?" Darian kept the gun exactly where it was. "Enough to know you've cut comms, frozen elevators, and got at least one team working the server floors. Maybe another watching the street. Professional job, but you overreached when you screwed with the safety systems. That's the kind of thing that triggers redundancies even you can't spoof for long." "You're out of date," the voice replied. "Corporate security isn't what it was when you were in the game. They outsource now. They trust algorithms." "Algorithms still run on hardware," Darian said. "And hardware breaks. All it takes is one watchdog process you didn't anticipate waking up to the fact that feed number 7 in the lobby went dark." "Maybe," the voice allowed. "But until then, we're the only ones in here with a plan." "You call this a plan?" Elara said. She was shaking so hard she could hear her own teeth click, but anger had climbed up on Terror's shoulders and started shouting. "Trapping your targets in a metal coffin and then trying to scare the man who just dropped in through the roof? You sure you read the right Saint file?" "Ms. Kincaid," the voice said, surprising her by using her name instead of her title. "When I was building that file, you were busy testifying in front of Congress about antitrust and pretending you weren't in bed with 3 different defense contractors." Her breath caught. "You don't know what you're talking about," she said. "I know enough," he replied. "I know the man with the gun to my operative's throat used to work for the people who now rely on your cloud to move their money and their secrets around the world. I know you built this tower as a monument to stability, and I know it's held together by people you've trained not to exist unless something breaks." Elara's gaze drifted toward the sound of Darian's breathing. The janitor. The man she'd seen pushing a mop, shoulders bowed. He didn't sound bowed now. He sounded like a line drawn across a map. "What do you want?" she demanded. "We told you," the boss said. "We want what you hide in the emergency liquidity reserves. The off-book accounts. The rainy day funds you pretend don't exist while your warehouses lay off half their workers and your stock buybacks keep your shareholders happy." Elara's stomach churned. He wasn't entirely wrong. "All of this," she said, "for money you're only going to have to launder and hide until somebody greedier than you decides to take it?" "Not all of it," he said. Something colder slid under the words, a current she hadn't heard before. "We want to send a message," he continued. "To your investors. To your competitors. To the governments that rely on my former colleagues. The ones who thought they could cut us loose and keep our skills without paying the price anymore." Darian's chest tightened. "Former colleagues," he said. "Come now," the boss replied. "You didn't really think you were the only saint they ever tried to own, did you? You walked away. I got fired. We all handle rejection differently." Elara blinked in the dark. Pieces moved in her mind. "This isn't just about us," she said slowly. "You're using Kincaid Consolidated as a stage." "Someone reads the memos," he said. Levinson found his voice again in a strangled whisper. "Elara, just give them access. The reserves are insured. We can recover. The risk to your life. The risk to my company," she cut in, heat flaring in her words, "is that every criminal outfit with a half-competent hacker will think they can walk into our infrastructure and take what they want if we roll over once. You already let them in," Darian said quietly. She opened her mouth to snap back, then realized he wasn't accusing. He was stating a fact. She exhaled, sharp and shaky. What's your alternative? She asked him. Stall, he said. Break their timeline. Force them to adapt instead of execute. People make mistakes when they have to improvise. Some of us make art, the boss said. Don't flatter yourself, Saint. You're not the only one who knows how to work under pressure. A faint vibration shivered through the floor then, so subtle Alara almost missed it. Darian didn't. He felt it in his knees, in the part of his brain that had once mapped helicopter rotor frequencies and the way tank treads vibrated through desert sand. Someone had noticed. He didn't know if it was an automated process in the building's control center, a bored night watchman seeing something blinking red, or a cop driving by who'd looked up at the wrong, or right, moment. But the building had shifted from isolated to compromised. Strain crept into the boss's voice, so slight no one but another operator would have heard it. Vargas, he said. Status report. Vargas swallowed. Darian felt the muscles move under the gun barrel. Inconvenienced, Vargas said dryly. Saint's got the drop on me. Finch is breathing. The CEO is mouthy. Levinson's leaking fear all over the floor. Levinson made a wounded noise. And you're still conscious, the boss said. Which suggests our guest is not as committed to killing as he used to be. Darian said nothing. He wasn't sure whether he'd held back on purpose or because the part of him that had once accepted the clean math of necessary deaths was too tangled up now with bedtime stories and lunchboxes and the knowledge of how it would feel for a little girl to get a visit from two cops with their hats in their hands. You're compromised, the boss said. We adjust. Team Bravo, status. A new voice crackled faintly through Vargas's earpiece. Alara could barely make it out, but Darian, inches away, heard it clearly. Bravo in position on 31, the man said. Server room access secured. Firewalls folded like paper. We're ready for biometric confirmation on your mark. So even if you win in here, the boss murmured in Darian's ear, we still walk with what we came for. Not if I shut you out first, Alara said. Every head turned toward her voice, like iron filings aligning with a magnet. You shut us out, the boss said slowly, and I paint this box with Levinson's brains and spend the rest of my career explaining to my shareholders why your stock is worth more to me as a cautionary tale than a revenue stream. That's not how shareholders work, she snapped. Tonight it is. Darian shifted the gun a fraction, reminding Vargas it was still there. He thought of Lily again. He thought of the rent notice. He thought of the way Alara had looked at the photo on her desk earlier, thinking no one saw her when she let the mask slip. He couldn't fix the whole world. He couldn't rewrite every algorithm or stop every man like the one in Vargas's ear. But he could pick a line and hold it. Ms. Kincaid, he said, voice low. Do you trust me? No, she said honestly. He huffed out something that might have been a laugh. Good, he said. Trust gets people killed. How about this, do you trust that I want to go home tonight and see my kid? The word hung in the elevator. Kid. It slid into the air between them and stuck to things. Alara swallowed. Yes, she said. Then do exactly what I tell you, he said. No more, no less. What are you going to do? She asked. He hesitated. The answer tasted like the desert again. Make it messy, he said. The first fire alarm tripped on 23. It started in the call center, where an automated system finally noticed that two separate feeds from the emergency battery backup units weren't reporting correctly. The system wasn't smart, it was paranoid. Paranoid systems didn't negotiate. They shrieked. Red strobes began to flash in vacant hallways. Sirens wailed, a rising, falling howl that made the windows vibrate. In the lobby, where Russ Baker lay bound and gagged behind a stack of supply boxes, his eyes flew open. He listened as the alarms echoed down the marble. He smiled around the tape. In the alley behind the tower, the first fire truck rounded the corner. In the elevator, the boss swore. "What did you do?" he snapped. "Didn't touch your systems," Darian said. "You're good. But the guys who designed your end run around the elevators forgot one thing. And that is? Corporate loves redundancy," he said. "You spoofed primary feeds. You never found the tertiary layer buried under a century of bad patch notes. You locked us in a box inside a machine that doesn't trust anyone." As if to punctuate his point, the car shuddered slightly. A recorded voice crackled to life in the ceiling. "Attention. Fire emergency has been detected in the building. Please proceed to the nearest exit in an orderly fashion. Do not use the elevators." Everyone in the car looked up on instinct. Elara laughed. It burst out of her high and wild and almost hysterical. "We're ahead of it on that one," she said. "Stay calm," the boss said. "Alarms don't mean response teams yet. We can still control the narrative." "You're not listening," Darian said. "This isn't about narrative anymore. This is about a computer script deciding whether a metal box full of people is a risk to structural integrity." "What are you talking about?" Vargas hissed. "Override protocols," Darian said. "In the event of a fire, stuck elevators are either moved to the nearest floor or locked down so rescue can access them. Unless catastrophic shaft failure is detected." Elara's blood ran cold. "Catastrophic what?" she asked. "Relax," he said. "We're not there yet. We just dropped far enough, fast enough to throw some flags. This is supposed to reassure us?" Levinson whimpered. "Nothing about tonight is supposed to reassure you," Darian said. "It's supposed to keep you alive." He adjusted his grip on the guns, ignoring the sticky warmth soaking into his waistband. He could feel time tightening like a noose. "Boss," a new voice cut in over the comms. "This is Beta. We've got eyes on the lobby. Fire crews are setting up. Cops 2 minutes out, tops." "So much for isolation," the boss muttered. "Saint, this was a simple transaction until you complicated it." "Yeah," Darian said. "I have that effect on people." "New plan," the boss said. "We extract with what we have. Bravo, secure partial transfer and scrub the rest. Beta, prepare alternate exit." Vargas. "I'm a little busy," Vargas said, voice tight. The gun under his jaw hadn't moved. "Kill him," the boss said. The word was soft. It detonated in Darian's chest. Vargas went very still. "So we're clear," he said. "You want me to attempt to kill Saint? In a stalled car. In the dark. While he's holding a gun on me and another within arm's reach." "That's correct," the boss said. "You know how that's likely to end," Vargas said. "Yes," the boss said. "I do." There was something in his tone Elara couldn't parse. Resignation, maybe. Or history. "We both knew this op was a long shot when we signed on," the boss continued. "You said you wanted him because if anyone was going to take him off the board, it should be someone who remembers why the board exists." A muscle jumped in Vargas's cheek. "You think this ends with him dying?" he asked. "I think it ends with one less ghost walking around with a conscience," the boss said. "One way or another. Execute, Vargas." The car seemed to shrink. Darian felt the shift the instant it started. The subtle loosening of tension in the man's shoulders. The way his weight rolled back onto his heels instead of forward. The surrender. Not to fear. To choice. Vargas.